Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am the host, Attorney John Khosravi, and I practice U.S. immigration law exclusively. For more information about the program, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Please note that this recording is informational only and does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with a licensed attorney for specific legal guidance that suits your case. Also, this recording is copyrighted and written permission is required for rebroadcasting. For more information about me, please visit www.jqqlaw.com.
Thank you so much for joining this episode of the podcast. We have a great guest today. It's Kari, and she's a professor of immigration law and other stuff and knows the field. And she wrote a great opinion piece on Law 360 about a recent court ruling, Nasrallah v. What's the guy's name? Try to forget his name. What is it? Nasrallah v. Barr. Yeah, and I thought it would be great to have her on to explain what that ruling is about and what effects it has. So, Kari, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Got it. So, what's the big deal about Nasrallah? How's that going to affect our practices and in the immigrants themselves?
Well, it was a very narrow question to the Supreme Court, which was, can federal courts review factual findings when they arise in the CAT context? Mm-hmm. And to everyone's pleasant surprise, the majority of the court said yes. And Justice Kavanaugh actually was the justice to author this decision. Mm-hmm. And it was a pretty straightforward analysis where the court said, look, there is a bar to final orders of removal. However, a CAT claim is not a final order removal. They exist independent of each other. They operate separately from one another. So even though there is a bar in the final order removal, and there is a bar on reviewing factual findings of criminal convictions, there will not be a bar on looking at the factual findings related to a CAT claim.
Interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so that was the analysis, which I think is pretty. I think I would assume that the vast majority of immigration advocates would agree with that that was pretty much, as long as people have an understanding of the immigration bar, that's where the conclusion will be. Unfortunately, the court agreed with that.
Wonderful. It's surprising the court is kind of taking the right decisions every once in a while recently. They have some bad ones too. We'll see what happens with DACA. I think that's we had this decision. We had the one about the definition of sex and all that stuff that came out. And if DACA goes the way of the immigrant, it's going to be like the world's upside down. Unexpected kind of stuff popping up. Yeah.
Well, and also the other big immigration case that's going to come down any day now is also, I forgive me for my, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, but it's Thurgasium, I believe, involving the expedited removal and whether there's federal review and habeas review in that context or not.
Well, that could be great. The way they made, for those who aren't familiar with expedited removal, there's no review way it's written in the statute, which is kind of crazy that they put that in. For so long, that's been the case. So if there's some oversight over expedited removal, it'll be like awesome to have that. I mean, it's going to clog up the systems to a certain extent because that's just the easy way for them to get people out, but that'll be interesting. So is there anything else you want to add about the Nasrallah case?
Oh yeah, so that was it. So I think what a lot of people are talking about Nasrallah is that then the practical impacts that it will have, but also the government initially opposed Nasrallah by saying, look, if you let federal courts have review over factual findings in CAT, you're opening the door to factual findings in withholding. And Justice Kavanaugh said, maybe, but that's not before us. And so I think that statement is very interesting. Rather than saying, oh, that's crazy, he said, that's not before us, which I think a lot of people see as a huge hint that they would be amenable for a future challenge on that matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was talking with a professor for another episode, and we were talking about just how the court just kind of makes up things. So in the decision, in that other case we're talking about, they said something like, it's with the case where this one person was it was a Ninth Circuit case where Ninth Circuit said that a person, I'm drawing a blank, but it was a recent Ninth Circuit case where it was about a free speech issue of whether like people could advise an immigrant that to take something that's illegal, and the court was like, the court said, Ninth Circuit took arguments that weren't in initial findings, and so that was incorrect. So it's nuanced procedural kind of stuff that they're really picking on. It's interesting.
Yeah, and that was the Sinig Smith case.
Yeah.
And the irony, of course, as everyone points out, for the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, last year involving or 2 years ago, whether baker violates the Constitution by discriminating against LGBT customers. That there, the court just decided its own arguments that weren't in the brief, but now they're saying the Ninth Circuit really was out of bounds when they did the same thing. So it's very much do what I say and not as I do, apparently.
Yeah, and just the legitimacy of the court just gets hit by these kind of inconsistencies. I mean, I started studying the history of immigration law since it started, and there's inconsistencies from the beginning of how the Supreme Court deals with immigration and stuff. But it's just apparent, like they're just making up as they go along, that there's no consistency in application on these kind of stuff.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I don't think they're making it up. But I think that the concern is, when are they hiding policy disagreements hidden under like originalist text or statutory interpretation? Yeah. Because they're allowed to change the law. There's no problem with them changing the law, but I think they have to be intellectually honest about it. And I think that's the travel ban case. They said, of course, we're going to overrule Korematsu because the president shouldn't have the right to unilaterally say that there's a national security interest. But then they upheld the travel ban by saying, of course, Trump must have some national security interest, even though he doesn't have to show his cards. So I think that's more of the issue, when they're trying to say something is more pure than what it actually is.
And a big part of all this is Congress just being silent and leaving it up to other branches to do it. I mean, there's the piecemeal kind of stuff that they try to do with immigration that pass, or I think it's a topic that they're too afraid to breach, or it's just too big a concept. So, DACA, for example, there has to be some sort of solution. The court shouldn't, this population's here, it's 1 million people at least. So it's like leaving it up to courts to make this big decision, especially during the turmoil the country's going through right now. It's like, do the executive, the Congress, and the legislature got to get together and make a fix for this and just keep it going.
Well, and then I think that's the most important takeaway with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has so much power. We're waiting in bated breath every June because Congress has been dormant for 12 years. Yeah. Ever since McConnell said we're not going to pass anything under Obama, and then they haven't passed anything under Trump. The problem is that instead of having the balance of powers, we have Trump doing something crazy, and then the Supreme Court upholding in a 5-4 decision or weighing in, and the other branch, which the founder said was the most powerful branch, is completely silent. Mm-hmm. And this is notable. Then in prior years, when the Supreme Court had a decision, Congress would simply file a law to amend it or correct it or modify it. The most famous was when Justice Rehnquist, in a decision, said that there is no sex discrimination when you fire a pregnant employee, because that discrimination is not based on sex, because the policy applied to pregnant persons and not pregnant women. And obviously Congress saw that, well, of course pregnancy is based on gender, and so they passed a law saying, yes, sex discrimination is pregnancy discrimination. Ergo, they just overturned the Supreme Court. Now it just languishes, which is definitely a problem of our government. Yeah,
it's a big problem for the republic, the democracy, when Congress is just they're figures that don't do stuff, when they just abdicate responsibility like that. And you see it for the executive. Even when it comes to war and stuff like that, they just let it slide. And they try to stop the money going to Yemen for the Saudi war, and that got, I think, vetoed by President Trump. But they just don't do things. Yeah,
right. So then it's Trump, and then ultimately challenged by the Supreme Court, which is not a way to do business.
Not at all. So
regardless of whether you agree or disagree with him, it's still, there needs to be a third branch in conversation.
Yeah, that balance is needed. So kind of moving on, let me know about you. How did you get involved in law? How did that happen?
I was hired as a paralegal by Bob Jope way back in 1994. It was my first job out of college. I wanted to do something in the public interest realm,
Hmm.
and Bob fortunately hired me. I had no experience in immigration, and then just fell in love very quickly with the practice, with the
Yeah.
area, with the clients, and from there went to law school. I tried going the corporate path, and after 7 months, I realized it wasn't for me. So then started I spent half the time working with a criminal defense attorney in San Francisco and half the time with Helen Sklar in Los
Oh, oh,
Angeles,
yeah.
working with her Ninth Circuit cases because I'd clerked at the Ninth Circuit. And so after that, I started up my own practice where it was half criminal defense and half immigration, with the focus on Ninth Circuit litigation.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I love Helen, and she's great. I haven't seen her since Christmas, but yeah,
Oh,
actually, happy
she's the
Christmas.
greatest. She's the greatest.
So, when the Ninth Circuit case, was it focused on all sorts of litigation, Ninth Circuit, or is it just immigration stuff?
Just immigration. So when I was in private practice, it was vast majority immigration and a couple of criminal cases in the Ninth Circuit, but the overwhelming is immigration. I started teaching about 8 years ago, and while I was at Boston College, I started up the Ninth Circuit appellate project.
Nice.
And where the law students are able to argue cases to the Ninth Circuit. And even though Boston obviously is not in the Ninth Circuit, we are allowed to have that clinic, which is great.
Oh, that's awesome. I'd love to, we'll talk more about that because when I talk to professors in these clinics they run, each one of them do such fascinating stuff. I really want to get the word out there so other schools can mimic it. But before that, I wanted to ask, I just want to say immigration is such an interesting practice. For me too, I wasn't expecting it. I just fell into it and I'm like, oh, this is such a great practice area. Every aspect of it is fascinating, except for dealing with the agencies could be excruciatingly painful. But other than that, just the people involved and how you're helping them and the puzzle that it is that you're trying to solve. It's just this is a great practice area that I fell in love with it too. I stuck with it. I can't practice anything else. I don't think it has to be immigration. So now, are you full-time professor at Boston School of
Yes.
Law in Boston? Okay.
Yeah.
And how was that? How do you like teaching as opposed to practice?
Well, I love teaching, but also, especially since 2016, I have really increased my pro bono practice.
Hmm.
So I'm still doing a lot of immigration work still. So for me, that's kind of the ideal to be able to do both. I really enjoy working with students, and I love being able to be kind of still in the thick of things when it comes to the Ninth Circuit litigation.
And, Ninth Circuit is Ninth Circuit, but like you see a lot of these decisions, especially travel ban related stuff in Massachusetts that are happening, the federal lawsuits about people when they go in the airport there, they're getting expedited removal, all this kind of stuff is an interesting place. Even when the travel ban happened, I think Massachusetts had some sort of travel ban. What's the legal word for it when they stop in that certain area? So
Yeah, they had a national injunction, and that was Susan Church who successfully brought that case, and she's just, I mean, a dynamic attorney. Yeah.
if you haven't seen Susan Church, she's on listservs, always doing some interesting stuff.
Right.
I don't know her personally. You said the name. I remember her. She has a photo, I think, on her email thing. I know her face. Maybe it was her website I went to, but yeah, that's awesome. And so right now you're not in Boston though. Are you you're in Montana? Are you teaching? I mean, the semester ended, but were you teaching by video?
I was right. Once things shut down, I did the teaching by video, and then this summer, working with some students. I had a sabbatical last year, and I was working with the Florence Project to work on a lot of appeals and Ninth Circuit matters with the Florence Project. So fortunately, I'm supervising 2 students right now who are doing habeas and bond work. So that's their summer project.
Now, with regards to doing classes by video, I had to do that by Zoom, and I thought it would be great because I don't have to leave my house, but I didn't enjoy it at all because I couldn't see. Either I had to look at 20 people's faces while I'm teaching, which was confusing. So I just shut that off. I was looking at myself. So it got to a point where I'm just like in a room talking to myself. It was really discomforting. So how did you like teaching on video?
So I taught my criminal law class, which is a class of 80 students, and there's a function where you can just get the active speaker. So the person who's speaking can it just appears with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually conducted my class as an in-classroom experience. I cold call students. I had discussions. I had debates. So I and the students consistently said they appreciated that it still felt like a real class. So I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see after this experiment, how much of this actually stays. What part of, I think for graduate schools in particular, what part can be taught remotely,
Yeah.
and what part can't. And I mean, I definitely don't want to downplay the advantages that happen from in-classroom experience, like even going out of the hallway and having a discussion, right, with your classmates.
Yeah.
That social connection and that in-person connection is invaluable. But it seems also that there might be, I would not be surprised if this leads to a continued thoughtful, deliberate online teaching.
Yeah. Even if a student's sick and they can't come to class, at least they could watch it at home at the very least. But we'll see how the ABA deals with this kind of stuff and how flexible they're going to be with it.
Yeah.
About the program that you have with the Ninth Circuit, how did that come up, and how do you practice functionally? How does that work, especially being in Boston?
So I, because I'd clerked with the Ninth Circuit and I had a lot of work at the Ninth Circuit, did a lot of pro bono work, was very fortunate that I knew about this program, in that the Ninth Circuit is the only one in the country that sets a briefing schedule to the academic school year. So the same set of students get to write the opening brief, write the reply brief, and present oral argument, which is unlike any other federal court. And so that was pretty special. And when I started, I was hired actually as a podium professor. But as in the first year I was there, the law school was looking for experiential learning opportunities, and they said, "Does anyone know anything?" I said, "Oh, I do." And fortunately, BC said yes, and Ninth Circuit said yes, and was able to start it up. I mean, our clients are they're either released, so we can communicate them through email or phone calls. And if they're not released, they're detained. But realistically, because it's a cold record at the Ninth Circuit, there doesn't need to be that face-to-face contact like there would be, for a hearing.
Yeah.
So it's actually very amenable. So that, and actually this year, even with COVID, both students were able to argue. Both sets of students were able to argue their cases in the Ninth Circuit. So it's a COVID-proof clinic in that respect, which was nice to have.
And that's quite a thing to put in your resume, arguing for the Ninth Circuit, even for passing the bar. That's amazing.
Yeah, and then and if the court policy is that if there's a published decision, the students' names are in the decision.
Wow.
Which is really exciting that the students have that to take with them.
I'm assuming these students, do they, from the past, do they continue to go into immigration law, or they kind of switch off and go into corporate law or something like that?
So it's a mix. The ideal student who I designed this clinic for was the person who's interested in immigration law and either didn't have the confidence or the exposure to realize how much of the practice is in federal courts. Mm-hmm. So I've been very pleased that some of the graduates of this program are now working at the Florence Project at the ACLU. Mm-hmm. We're working for Stephen Manning. So I mean, definitely is able to encourage that part for the students who go into immigration law. But also, I also just choose a lot of students who are just very excited about the opportunity. So the alumni are prosecutors, they're defense attorneys, they're corporate lawyers, they basically run the gamut of all possible fields of law. And what's been exciting is that they've just been so enthusiastic about the experience and really have, enjoyed it tremendously. So that's been a lot of fun.
It's so good to have people in all these different areas have an understanding of immigration, because people who don't touch on immigration think it's just filling out forms. They don't realize the complexity of the issues you have to deal with and how politicized it is and how it could vary so drastically among circuits and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I shifted this year to picking up an asylum case, but prior to that, the focus had been non-citizens with criminal convictions, which, as you know, is basically DACA kids. You know, like all of our clients were long-term residents, but they weren't eligible for DACA because you know, they had a serious, well, actually, it's not even serious. Even a misdemeanor can disqualify someone from DACA. And I shouldn't even say kids, because one of our clients is, you know, a grandmother, but been in the United States since she was 6 months old. So it really is, I think that piece of it opened a lot of students' eyes because of the rhetoric. I mean, even Hillary Clinton said that, of course, I'm going to deport the criminals, which people accept uncritically until they realize who's that person and you know, what type of crime.
The definition of criminal is here, how wide ranging it could be.
That, I mean, to deport people over marijuana offenses is just crazy. And so that, I think the clinic really, I've had a feedback from a lot of students who didn't realize you know, how shocking and how irrational our policy is in terms of the impact that it has on the people impacted and their immediate family members who are also impacted. So I've really enjoyed that aspect of teaching clinic as well.
Yeah, if the immigration, if people actually talk to people who are the immigrants, especially one of the things, I do a lot of videos on YouTube, and the only videos where I get negative feedback are always the DACA videos where I talk about what DACA is. And I'm not even political about it. I say this is DACA, this, that. And those are ones where I get thumbs down or I get like hateful kind of language. It's amazing. Like, you know, the most, you know, the most people feel sad for immigration system are the DACA kids, and not even ones that have clear history. But to see the animosity from the other side of it, sometimes it's like, I wish you could see the people, you talk with them to see who we're dealing with, and you might change your mind on this kind of stuff.
Well, it's interesting because those supporters are definitely in the minority. I mean, the public opinion polls show that 90% of all Americans support DACA, and even among Trump voters, 70% support DACA. So, yeah, it's sad that the people who are disagreeing are just so dug in. Rather than realizing, you know, what the issues are and even, you know, what fights are worth having.
That's the thing. Like, if all the fights that pick DACA is and one that's a losing fight, most people are reasonable. People will be like, come on, like, it's 20 years since they're 6 months old. You know, let's work something out. And I think
and also our taxpayer dollars supported their public education. So it seems to be the craziness to deport people when they're willing and able to give back. And be productive members of society and pay back those taxes and support other people. I mean, that's the crazy part. It's like, why?
There's no why or rhyme or reason to a lot of this stuff that we're seeing. A lot of the craziness the country is going through. But immigration at the day, it's you deal with people, so it's a lot of fun getting to know people on a really personal, in-depth kind of level, and you see how interesting people are from all over the world. So I love it. I can sense you have the same enthusiasm for it. Kari, before we leave, is there anything else you want to let the audience know about? Or also, what's the best way to contact you if they wanted to reach out?
So I think on the website, the Boston College website, my email is there, Kari, Kari.Hong, Hong at bc.edu. And that's probably the best way to reach me.
You know, I at the beginning of all my episodes, I usually like ask about how to pronounce the name properly, and I'm like, it's probably weird. I do that every time. I should stop doing that. And the one time I did, I called you Kari instead of Kari.
Well, forgive me. So that I should have spoken up earlier. But
no, it's okay. That's very polite of you. But I really want I want to make sure I pronounce his name right. But I know from now on, I'm never gonna forget Kari. So glad. Thank you for connecting so quickly. I saw the article, we got in really quick, especially when you're, you know, you're out of town right now, essentially. But it was a great pleasure to meet you. And you know, I'm gonna end the show. Let's talk a little bit longer after that. But thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, John. This has been great.
Awesome.